Hello and welcome. My name is Carol Carter, and I am the founder and president of GlobalMindED. And this is Educator Appreciation Week. So we have a number of different events all week this week. And we are so fortunate today to have some of the luminaries of the profession with us. And actually, Bena Kallick, who is really a co-founder of GlobalMindED. Along with Karen Tuiboyas, who was with us on Monday. Some of you were part of her session. So it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. For those of you who don't know, GlobalMindED is about creating a capable, diverse talent pipeline to get more women, people of color, underrepresented, ability status, any type of diversity into the education, employment, economic mobility, and leadership pipeline. We do that through an annual event every year. We do it through Inclusive Leader Awards across 14 sectors. We do it through programs on 15 college campuses that are historically Black colleges, minority serving, and Hispanic serving institutions. And we also do it through our First Generation to College Leadership Program and a Young Professionals Program. So very much looking forward to working with you all in this capacity today and in the future. And we'll give you some news items at the end of the session today on some events coming up the next couple of days for GlobalMindED and more specifics on celebrating our graduates 2020, which is our focus for all of next week. So I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Bena Kallick. Bena is the co-director of the Institute for the Habits of Mind, and she's the program director for EduPlanet 21, which is a company dedicated to online professional development and learning, curriculum-based and based on the Understanding by Design framework. She received her doctorate in educational evaluation from Union Graduate School. And Bena is a person who has been, I think, on every single continent. We literally together at breakfast thought of the idea for GlobalMindED in, I think it was 2014 in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So she has more energy than any person that I know. She publishes about a book every single year, and she's just a delight. So I'm gonna hand this incredible panel today of Heidi and Allison and XO to Bena, and she'll be leading us. So welcome everyone, and great to see you, Bena.
Thank you, Carol, for the lovely introduction. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce my two colleagues with whom I have done such wonderful work, and they do such wonderful work. And right now, it's Allison Zmuda, my co-author with Students at the Center, Personalized Learning with Habits of Mind. And she has also the Personalized Learning Personalized Network. And then Heidi Hayes-Jacobs, who has the wonderful work that she's been doing with Curriculum 21. And she also has a whole network of people in her community. Now, what's exciting is that they've combined and merged together the most beautiful transformational network in which we're going to all learn about how we can be a part of forums that they're creating, and how we can really think about this moment and think about this moment in light of all the possibilities that it opens up for us. So without any further ado, my two most esteemed colleagues and certainly most global-minded people I know, Allison and Heidi.
Thank you so much. Good morning. I'm going to share my screen, so if you can just bear with me for 2 seconds as we start to get rocking and rolling. Okay, so this is a short webinar that Heidi and I have constructed to be as hopefully fresh and engaging and inviting as possible, not only for our educators around the world, but also other stakeholders who have a vested interest in trying to transform not just the learning experience that may be happening in their homes as parents, as grandparents, concerned citizens, but we're also starting to think about the broader challenges that GlobalMindED is so devoted to, and thinking about various institutions that go shoulder to shoulder with school to continue to inform our citizenry, to continue to go after pervasive inequities, and the power of how we continue to come together to innovate, imagine, and create.
Let me pick up from here. And first of all, Allison and I want to thank Carol and Bena and the team at GlobalMindED for creating this opportunity, but also creating a very fresh and dynamic approach to learning that's expansive and inclusive of many points of view. We're very grateful. Just a quick addition to Bena's lovely introduction. I just want to say something about Allison. Allison is an expert, there is no question about it, in personalized learning, but she's also brings brilliance, I think, to the table in any engagement. And for me, as someone who's built their career around shaping and designing responsive curriculum, mapping it, developing it, and over the last few years, really focusing on bolder approaches to new learning environments, I can't think of a person who I would rather be collaborating with than Allison, because right now is the time for us to be really thinking through the extraordinary challenge that's facing us. So Allison has been an amazing person to interact with, and I look forward to continued work in this direction. Allison?
And the power of collaborating with Heidi Hayes-Jacobs as our Love Fest continues, and we did this intentionally to start to show the real synergy, not only with Bena, but how our work continues to inform and enrich one another. The work that she's done over the course of many decades around curriculum mapping. She also, in some ways, is a futurist, but she's a futurist that has very practical intentions associated with it. And the idea of not just imagining what could be, but also directly leading people through the lens of engaging in that work makes it fresh, inviting, and aspirational. And the territory in which we wanted to structure our conversation today was really grounded in these two questions. So that first question, what are learners experiencing in the living curriculum? This is a question that has been very much on my mind as I started this foray into personalized learning about 10 years ago. And really, when it comes to personalized learning, the heartbeat of personalized is personal. And the realities is that the learner actually is experiencing life and learning in real time. Sometimes it's honored and accepted in the curriculum of their school lives. And a lot of other times it's actually not acknowledged or indicated. So the interesting dynamic of the lens of personalized learning in the past couple of years, this was the rich fodder for really having the expectation that students are invited and have a seat at the design table. This is something that Bena, Kallick, and I wrote about in Students at the Center around the 4 attributes: paying attention to voice, co-creation, social construction, and self-discovery. And then COVID-19 hit. And the reality is that our worlds shifted literally overnight. In many cases around the world, schools got an announcement that they had to shutter their doors within 24 to 48 hours and shift from a predictable on-site set of routines to an emergency remote learning situation. And the reality too of trying to start thinking about what are we doing to support our students in the living curriculum as they navigate the burdens, the challenges, but also the wonderings and the aspirations and the imaginations that they've had an opportunity to pursue over the course of this remote learning experience. The second is really grounded in our continued thinking and co-creation, Heidi and I, around what matters most in getting kids ready to move into a curriculum for this upcoming fall. what are the suggestions and structures and wonderings that we want to put in front of colleagues that are attending this webinar, but also we're trying to create some level of support because we do have enough opportunity to do something about this in our second go round. Heidi?
Yes, let's just go on, I think, to the next slide. Thanks, Allison. So it's hard enough as an adult for me to wrap my head around all that's happening. And we keep thinking about what it must be like for learners. Right now, even as we speak, the range of experiences is vast. And to help us begin to discuss actionable steps and approaches, we are discussing and framing what's going on in the crisis in 3 phases that evolve into one another. They're not like steps. You go from step 1 to 2 to 3. They're somewhat commingling, but they are ongoing. Right now, the phrase we'd use is triage, which is a really good medical term for talking about on the battlefront, an immediate crisis. You have to do quick decision-making and sorting. And right now that's what's been happening. And none of us listening has ever experienced anything like this. None of us have been in a global pandemic. And the range and variety of how this is playing out, depending on where you live in the world, or if you're in the United States, what part of the country, what state you're living in, makes such a difference. And so we're in the midst of that now, and we believe there's a lot of lessons to be learned in this experience right now that can inform what's coming up in the next few months. And that is a transition. And the transition is this notion of when school resumes under, I think it would be a mistake to say we're going back to school. We're going to have to go forward to school in a very different way, taking into account what's been transpiring since earlier this year. And in some countries that goes back to January, because I know you have a global audience. And for some parts of the world, it's happening right now. And others, it's been over the last few weeks. But the notion here is looking at how do we set up plans and curriculum choices and structural choices about this transition when we're really not even sure whether students will be on site, whether it'll be a hybrid, whether it'll be online exclusively as it is pretty much right now. And then I think there's this opportunity, as Allison alluded to as a post-pandemic view, that the reimagining of school has been in discussion for some time now. But what I think is going to happen is we are going to have school in a different way. And can we use this, absolutely use this as an opportunity to recast the way we view the educative experience, both virtually, with community, with networking, and with the actual design and structure of our school environments. Allison?
I think, as Heidi was alluding to, that this is not a series or steps, that there is real meaningful conversation in the triage moment around an example of grading and reporting. So the notion of pass-fail, for example, is opening up the door to more rich exploration, imagination that's happening in homes all around the world. And so we're starting to figure out in the triage moment, what are the insights, what are the highlights that we want to continue to capture to inform and inspire the transition in the post-pandemic phase. So that's just one slice of how these 3 very much intersect or commingle, as Heidi suggested.
Allison?
So we wanted to start addressing what we distilled down to 4 major lessons that we have had the great opportunity as we continue to engage with lots of education leaders from around the world. So the first lesson that we wanted to think through and pay attention to is leading through the crisis. So I'm going to turn it over to Heidi to talk about the wisdom that we got from a particular principal in Hong Kong.
Yes, thanks, Allison. David Loveland is principal of the Hong Kong International School, which I believe many of you probably are aware of, but is a really outstanding school. And in an interesting way, David shared with us, they had a kind of dress rehearsal for the pandemic. If you'll recall, in the fall of 2019, there were protests in Hong Kong and schools were immediately shut down. In fact, the government shut them down very suddenly. There was no alert. They didn't read about it in the email. They literally showed up and the school was closed down. And so they had to be responsive. They had to figure out what to do. They were thrown immediately into full online learning, full-time environment. And there were some things they learned that they would do differently if they could do it again. And part of it had to do with the platform that was used. Part of it was the communication mechanism with families. So they reflected on it, and one of their first points of agreement was that they would move forward with always having a crisis management team. Who knew when this could happen again? Protests might occur, government in flux. But little did they know that the time they would be using this crisis management team would just be a few months later in January when COVID-19 hit them. But they were ready. And they were ready because they had set up better mechanisms. They communicated more effectively about how to set up a management schema, a manageable chunks of planning, lesson planning, better communication with parents. They set up ways to do virtual walkthroughs through Zoom classrooms and Zoom rooms. They worked through opportunities for more student voice and input. But the thing that was clear is the language had to be clear, and that they relied not on a hierarchical model, but a much more of a lateral model where people helped by their ability and talent, not always by their job description. So for example, he was telling us how they needed some quick video tutorials. And yes, there was a technology guy who could participate in that, but they had another teacher, just a classroom teacher who was really adept. Those people stepped up, just like you would in a crisis, to use the talent to meet the needs of the school. We shared this in one of our blogs that is posted on our new website, 9 Lessons Learned from a Hong Kong Principal. Allison?
The second aspect around leading through the crisis is diving a little more deeply into the language of leadership. I read a fascinating piece on Fast Company this morning, and it really resonated with me around how to continue to use language at the very tops of the organization to set the tone, not just the stability in navigating the crisis, but the future forward notion of what schools will continue to rise up and become. And so language like getting kids caught up, language like that we're looking for the deficits and trying to close the gaps, really are focusing on more of a deficit-based mindset that sends a message to classroom teachers, to families, to students, that they're gearing up for a high stress situation. And so as we're having an eye toward the end of one school year, the opening of the next school year, really setting up an appropriate frame of mind so that we're looking at this as an assets-based, strengths-based, and certainly responsive-based view of learning. That's something that we hope for when it comes to what heads of school are doing, but also it's something that we want to continue to engage in the leadership as we're moving through some of the choices that we're making in curriculum assessment and instruction that always involves the student, not as a token, but again, as a meaningful voice in the conversation about how they experienced the COVID-19 remote learning situation, and what is it that they're hoping for as they're moving back into a more normalized school setting. So the second one is addressing inequities in schooling. So this lesson is very much grounded in, first and foremost, access to be even an online environment. One of the things that was so incredibly concerning to both Heidi, Bena, and I, as we chatted in the first opening weeks of this, is that 25%, for example, in Los Angeles, 25% of the students in Los Angeles haven't logged on in that learning situation. So they're not even engaging in the learning. And the question is, one is access to technology. The second is access to get online in a consistent, stable way. But the third is, what are they actually engaging in? So that there is a significant variance in the quality of learning plans. And this is as true in a particular school as it might be true around the country and around the world. And the last piece, by the way, is inequities in grading experience. So there has been just such a widely dispersed view of what does it mean to provide a mark at the end of the school year. And those levels of inconsistency really is making it so that there's immense local pressure on what grading and reporting should look like. That, again, in terms of honoring the inequities in resources, we do want to make sure that it is a fair and reasonable account. So Heidi's going to take lesson 3 and lesson 4.
As we proceed, and you can kind of see the natural outgrowth here, we started to take a deeper dive into the actual plans that have been emerging. And perhaps one of the reasons students haven't engaged is even when they've taken a look at it, it's not engaging. That there will be issues about the actual choices of curriculum, which we'll touch on in a moment. But it's also what we're being asked to do in some instances with certainly good intention. A lot of teachers haven't had a lot of experience working full-time online, as very few of us. And the type of tasks that would often emerge were kind of glorified worksheets or workbooks, cut, paste, thrown on there at their worst. And then there were some remarkably powerful and engaging experiences, people who really get the feel for how to lay out a menu of wonderful types of interactions using more contemporary tools, better use of interactions between learners. The range has been tremendous. But one of the big takeaways, probably the biggest lesson for us, was that learning is at home. It's on somebody's kitchen table. And as David said, our Hong Kong principal, he said, what our teachers learned is parents are watching us. They're seeing that teacher on the Zoom room. They're looking at this page. And in many instances, especially with our younger learners, the parents are expected to be instructional aides, paraprofessionals in a way. And if the language, because we are all in education, for those of you who are educators, very good at educationese, if the language isn't clear, if it's officious, if it isn't invitational, and quite frankly, if it isn't clear at all in terms of communication, then we're going to lose them. And if we lose the parents, we've lost the kids. And so one thing we learned and have been studying is how to set up a framework, templates, ways of engaging that are manageable. The phrase manageable chunks kept coming up again and again. And we'll share a few examples of what we've been developing with a number of the schools we work with regarding that. Moving on, this kind of leads to the big one we're working on right now. And we just had a post that went up last week by the same title as this session on the return to school and curriculum choices as we face COVID-19. And right now we're taking a very deep dive here. We're doing a 4-part series on this question, on looking at how do we now take a look and getting ready to go to the return to school moving forward. How are we going to make choices about what to cut, what to keep, what to create? Otherwise, we're going to really run into trouble. We can't pretend to pick up where we left off. It's not even clear what's happened between the middle of March or February, wherever school finished in terms of on-site. and how we'll return. We're dealing with a whole array of student learning experiences, what they've experienced. We're dealing with social readjustment. We're dealing with emotional needs. There'll be some pluses. They'll be happy to see one another, but it's not totally clear what this will look like. So we're looking at establishing future forward learning goals, which Allison will explain in a moment, to help guide and help ameliorate some of these more challenging questions. Allison?
Yep. So this is the spirit of our second blog post that is not released yet, but it probably will be in the next few days when Heidi and I are finishing our mulling and brewing. The interesting dynamic of starting to pay attention to the brilliant idea of what to cut, what to keep, what to create, something that Heidi and Marie Alcock first drafted in the Bold Moves book. At the same time, you're starting to think about those broader aims of school and the notion of how do we make sure that when we're working one teacher at a time or one unit at a time, that the choices they're making are informed and aligned with the other horizontal teachers on their team, the vertical teachers on their team. But also, let's talk about another aspect. How are we making sure that the choices, the cuts, the keeps, the consolidates, the creates are in service to the broader learning that we're aiming for in the first place? And that's really sort of the synergy between those curriculum choices, the curriculum storyline or narrative, as well as what it is desired or aimed to do, not only on behalf of students, but also on behalf of ourselves. Because as we're starting to move into this notion of a future forward learning goal, I want to talk quickly about a couple of key criteria that inform your read of the three examples that are on the screen in front of you. The first key criteria is that there needs to be a reasonable number, but at the same time, it has to cover the breadth of the learner's experience in all aspects of life. So from a scope as well as a concise set, that's incredibly important. This is not a list that needs to go on for 10 or 20. We really are preferring it to be 10 or less, so that it's not something that folks have to manage like a set of standards, but something that can truly serve as a North Star. The second is that key criteria is that it really grounds some of the choices that teachers are making on behalf of students. Heidi and I continue to write about the idea of things that are being elevated into the foreground and things that are no longer worth our time and attention. And again, these kinds of future forward learning goals do provide that guidance to make those deliberate choices on behalf and in conjunction with learners. The third piece is that this very much is transdisciplinary in nature. The intention is that you can see, for example, seek to investigate. This is as true in a social science or a science or a health class as it is true when we are navigating and wondering as citizens and human beings. And so the reality of this is that it actually unfurls into the wide breadth of problems and challenges and aspirations and imaginings that not only students have, but we all have as part of a global citizenry. So the illustrative examples that you see in front of you were actually co-created, not just by Heidi and myself, but the powerful Bena Kallick was part of the party in drafting these. And again, it's an interesting way of continuing to give an homage to habits of mind as well, because the synergy of these parts of thinking about social emotional learning is infused in each and every one of these statements. But we also are making sure that these future forward learning goals have something that can actually have a level of timelessness associated with it. Heidi?
Yes, let me add one other angle on this, if I might. I want you to think about what will happen if you don't have future forward goals, whatever you want to call them. There will be a tendency, and I think this is a reasonable prediction based on a lot of experience, and I think you will concur, for people to jump on coverage. We've got to get through this unit. We've got to cover these standards. We're simply not going to be able to do that in any way, shape, or form in the way that it might have been done in the past, and even then it wasn't a great practice. It's going to be about choice making and choosing what matters most. And so our hope is that elevating these goals will actually get down to the granular, because we're going to have to make choices. What are we going to cut out? What are we going to cut back on? What will we consolidate? What will we need to create in response to the students' experiences so that they can document their stories, reflect on what they're experiencing now, create artifacts of the experience of COVID-19. Thanks, Allison. So this slide is an example of something that we alluded to before. We were talking about friendly language, making it more accessible. And one of the projects I was asked to work on was with the New Haven Public Schools, and they basically asked me to work with them on developing an easy, manageable approach for their elementary teachers to start with, to communicate with parents. And they said, make the language, something Allison just referred to, understandable. So one of the things Allison had found were some great examples, one from Hong Kong, one from Mason City, Ohio. There are others out there, where when teachers put out a week at a glance and we used visuals, very discursive language, so the language is written in a friendly way, in a discussion, conversational modality with key questions, teachers and parents and kids could see what a week looks like. This is a unit in 4th grade on, it's called American Road Trip, and they're looking at regions in the United States. Could you hit the next slide, please, Allison? So in this, we also thought, when we get down to the daily lesson plan level, what might we use to connect with kids and with the parent? And one thought I had, based on a lot of work I've done with a number of wonderful graphic designers, is icons seem to make sense. So we started generating a set of icons. And so if you'll go to the next slide, what begins to happen is we now have, if you're online, a very simple, engaging way of saying there will be 3 types of experiences. And instead of using language like behavioral objective or the standards or language that deals with proficiency targets, these are not the words parents or even kids use, but they did understand the word engage, they did understand the word demonstrate, and they did understand the word share. So day 1, out of that week at a glance, we used an icon. And one of the things we found that was terrific was the icons gave us a quick view of how much variety there was. So viewing Google Slides, watching a video, the demonstration always created some form of a, frankly, a formative or a summative assessment. Fill out the Google form, go onto our Padlet, join a class chat in Google Classroom, play the geography travel game with your parents. Whether you like this set of activities isn't really the point, though I think you would agree there's some variety here. What was critical is this has helped parents and kids get the work done. They are engaged, and that works, I think, particularly well. Can we go to the next slide? Allison?
So one of the things, if you wanted to see some more powerful examples, whether it's under the triage or the transition or post-pandemic, our website, the one that we just drafted about 3 or 4 weeks ago, is transform.curriculum21.com. So as you go and venture into that territory of reading and responding, you also can be part of the forum. And the forum is really trying to make sense of a complex set of interrelated issues, but also doing it from a globally minded way. So we have educators and students and families from around the world that are informing our work, whether it's sharing resources, engaging in interviews, posting new and fresh ideas. So we would hope if you're open and interested, and would love to have you join that conversation there. So now we're opening this time back up to you. So we're going to turn it over to Bena to engage in some facilitation based on some viewer responses and other questions and ideas you might have. So thank you.
So, excuse me, a couple of things have come up, but most significantly, I'd like to introduce someone who is a student, a 7th grade student, I believe. Is that right, Sochi?
Yes.
Yes, she's a 7th grade student. And I invited her to give us a little bit of her perspective in terms of what to keep, what to cut, what she's really found to be most meaningful to her. She's also in a school where I believe there's a high amount of technology. So Xochiti, introduce yourself, please, and give us a little bit of your response to some of the things that you just heard.
Okay. Hi, my name is Xochiti Vargas, and I'm a 7th grade student. I go to Three Creeks K-8, and it's an all technology school. We use iPads pretty much every day in class. So this transition from being in the classroom to online school for our school hasn't really been that difficult. There has been some communication aspects that have been a little bit difficult for parents to understand. Me and my family have family meetings where we create like docs, and then we print them out and put them on the fridge of like what we're going to do during the week and how like the meal plans and all of that different stuff. We kind of just work that out. And I think a lot of the stuff that I heard just now is very applicable to my school at the moment. I honestly really think that it relates to a lot of the things that the school is trying to accomplish. And I know that my teachers are really trying to engage students. That is one of the like main goals right now, especially because it's still kind of new. So yeah.
That's great. And you know that you're invited to that forum because there's plenty of space for you to interact. So I hope that you will do that. There also have been, there's been a little bit of a discussion in the chat about the question that someone raised, Tim Hall raised, where he was interested. He was saying that he's very much interested in knowing how you looked at it from the leadership out to the group, but how would you also have people give you their information, their influence? So for example, Sochi being invited to kind of respond. How do you get students included? How do you get parents included? And there's been a little bit of a chat around that.
May I step up to that for one moment, because I love the question. In the course of our collaboration, we've participated on a number of forums like this one. And I had the good fortune of interacting with Masa Yukanen, who was very much involved in the Million Student March after the gun violence that occurred at Parkland. And there is a new movement she's working on right now, and a model she has multiple partners called Just Ask Us. And what it's about is gathering student voices and parent voices to inform the decision-making that's going to go on in institutions. I just posted her email address. She has no trouble. I asked her about this. You can write her directly, and I'm not going to go through all the materials about it, but it is very exciting. And the response has been through the roof. And what they're looking at are creating tools, procedures, formats for students to express voice. For me, I think it will be great to get it all out there, but I think it's going to be important on the local level. And Allison and I are really supporting what we are calling virtual community summits, that there will be input from parents and input from students, both directly and through survey forms as well. I know you've been working on this too, Bena, on how to gather that. Thank you.
Yeah, and Sochi, you know, I hope you'll take down that. It's in the chat. Take it down, because you might want to let them know that you're available, if you are so, for your perspective. Also,
Bena, if I can interject, I wanted to also respond to the powerful question that Tim asked as well. And in addition to Heidi's response, I also want to clarify that students can actually be included right from the very beginning in the drafting of future forward goals. And so the territory of where they come from, they start with words and phrases. Like you can start to begin to imagine even an old school Wordle. You know what I mean? When we were so infatuated by that a couple of years ago. But the intention of really trying to grab student voice in the conversation about what inspires them to persist, to imagine, to question, to revise, to continue to push the envelope of their skill and strategy and sophistication, that's incredibly powerful. And you can do that through the lens of an area of expertise, whether it is part of the curriculum or part of their extracurricular endeavors, whether it's through school or whether it's through something they're engaged with in the outside community, whether it's a virtual experience or a place-based experience. So that to me can be the richness of where it can start to germinate from. And I want to call out a specific school district, Escondido Union High School District, where we actually involved students as leaders and facilitators of the conversation. And Bena and I actually saw the power of when students actually are entrusted to lead the conversation. It is stunning to see the reaction of the adults in the room. And one adult leaned over and said to me, you know, if this is the future of what learning looks like, I think we're in good hands. Because they were so incredibly impressed with the level of skill and sophistication, not only as communicators, but also to be able to articulate the power of what learning looks like to them.
And Allison, it's Carol, but I just want to interject that Sochi was part of GlobalMindED last year in the Teens and Technology track. And I think as a result of this whole pandemic that we will be, co-creating the future with students and all of that collaboratively coming forth from their wisdom to enrich us and vice versa.
Yes.
One of the questions that is adding to this is the question of how do you see getting the student voice virtually? She's saying powerful ideas from students. Do you have some thoughts about how to do it virtually as well?
One thing I want to piggyback is I think there could be something akin to the Million Student March, but a virtual student march. And I really want to support this work with this Just Ask Us movement. It's connected with a lot of the very well recognized student voice groups that are participating in this work. But it strikes me that the key is going to be localizing this, that there'll be power in numbers, but I would argue that there should be summits like what we're having now, where you have leadership teams and teacher leadership teams meeting with students about their shared experience, their perceptions. The one thing I would just piggyback, and I'd be curious about Xochiti's response to this, is I was in a collaboration with a group of high school students on this very topic recently. And one of the things they said is, please don't give token student voice. Oh, we have a student and this is just lovely, but to make it legitimate. And that they're participating on the early onset of this, not just as a reaction to decisions that are made. So I would say right now, as people are moving forward, we should encourage leadership. In fact, we all do this individually in our practice. I know we do. We're saying, have you got your students involved right away? So let me stop there.
Xochiti, do you want to respond?
Sure. I think
yeah.
I'm getting there, I'm thinking.
That's okay.
Yeah, I think right now, from my experience and my teachers, there have been like quite a few miscommunications and teachers aren't communicating within themselves, so we have like these two major projects going on at one time. And I think that it's a very, very important aspect for teachers to understand that, because it makes it 1,000 times easier on students. And I think, yeah, I don't know.
If I can interject, Sochi, I wanted to share the experience of my high school daughter, my sophomore. She saw that our city has renamed the learning experience an emergency learning plan. And she sort of got grumpy with using the word emergency in that way. And she said, I don't get why the adults are in such a fuss about the emergency. It's an emergency for the adults. From a student point of view, it's not really an emergency for us. There are other emergencies that we have, and the idea of what's being put online, that's generally not one of them. And the interesting perspective when you hear that freshness from whether my daughter is 15, whether you hear it from a 15-year-old or a 13-year-old or a 7-year-old, it does continue to open up your own thinking as educators, as concerned family members, about what are the real meaningful choices and how can we continue to benefit from conversations, not just through the lens of feedback forums and virtual forums, although we believe, all three of us, Bena, Heidi, and myself, we believe that that is significant and important. But at the same time, the notion of moving from a tokenism point of view, we're seeking out to inform the adult decisions, to a much different perspective. We're seeking out to not only inform, but enrich a set of decisions where not just the students, but as we're continuing to see in this pandemic, the families all of a sudden have a very important role in that home-school partnership.
So I see that there's been a response to the question, can we have the slides?
I just posted.
And Heidi just posted that, so that you know, that can perhaps continue to inspire you. And we also hope that the participation in the website will inspire your thinking, and that you can be continuing to do some of the kind of the engagement with the website. Are there any other questions out there? It looks like people are.
I also just posted the link to that PDF flyer that
From Just Ask?
yeah, on Just Ask Us.
Yeah, great.
And
great.
I do want to call attention one more time to Tim on around with student voices. And I want to read this, if that's okay. So hopefully there's not a chat that bumps it up. With student voices, it's amazing to include representative voices, but how do we include the less involved students with our future forward goals? And I think, again, what Tim's continuing to point out is that we deeply care not just about a representative set of samples, but learning is a highly personal endeavor. It has to be true for every learner, because at the end of the day, if learners continue to feel like they're doing work on behalf of somebody else, it changes their perspective, their attitude, and their commitment to engaging deeply in the work. So when it comes to thinking about the future forward learning goals, we do need to not only send feedback surveys out, but we do need to continue to reach out to each learner to engage them in conversation. It's not just about what do you think of these phrases or ideas, or tell me what's on your mind. It's really starting to see and make sense of the pairing between the kinds of problems, challenges, acts of creation that they're fascinated by, and the connection to those learning goals.
So Carol, do you want to ask that question?
Well, I know it's a bigger picture, but I gotta believe if more of the women like you were in the bigger leadership, we would be traveling this stuff really fast. And, you know, no offense to anyone who's male, but I just think there's a lopsided 72% of women are in K-12, and the leadership superintendents, it's like 13,900, and then it's 1,984, which is the year I graduated from college, are women. So I remember that. And boy, what a difference that is. So I just wondered, you know, how can we get more incredible people like you in leadership to make it at least balanced within K-12 for the representation of women that are there?
Anybody want to take that on?
Well, you know, I'm a little bit of an odd duck in that I blaze my own trail from a classroom teacher to a consultant. So I think from my perspective, it's the opportunity as I start to see people in the profession, in the 20-somethings, 30-somethings, and 40-somethings, we do have this vision that that glass ceiling doesn't exist anymore because of the powerful efforts of people that have come before us. Yeah. So I think that I am grateful to be in the position I'm in, influencing other leaders in other school organizations, but also to be continually partnered with the two people in the windows to my right, of really trying to grow that level of synergy and commitment to a range of learners, both adult and kids. So I don't know if anybody else wants to take that very massive challenge on.
Well, I think over all the years that I've been in education, and there are quite a few, I've seen it change, I've seen it grow, and I think it runs parallel to the rest of our society, which is that
it does.
You know, I think it's just a matter of how we have the confidence and the will to, and the strength to make sure that our voices are heard. And I think that's true for not just women, but for many different populations in our society. Yeah. So this is a good time to pay attention to it for sure. We really thank you so much, ladies, for the brilliant work that you're doing. And I think we'll turn it back to you, Carol.
Thank you so much to all of you, and to all of you who made time to attend this week as we celebrate all educators. I want to share with you a couple of other sessions coming up on Friday. One is called Equity Consciousness, Special Needs and Diversity with Dr. Yvette Jackson, and also Lauren Wells, who's founder and CEO of Creed Strategies. And then we have another session in the afternoon Friday called Equity Begins with Early Childhood. We know that the whole early childhood area has been so affected by this pandemic, and that's led by Dr. Lisa Roy, who's at the Buffett Early Childhood Institute. And she has a really fabulous panel, including Martha, who's been part of this. So it's so great, Martha, to be having you involved in this as well. And then finally, I want to share that really for about the next 7 or 8 weeks, we'll have a number of different programs really responding to the needs that you've shared with us. But for next week, it's all about celebrating our 2020 graduates who did not get to do their ceremonies in their year in the way that they would have liked to. And we have first generation to college role models as speakers. One of them is a Harvard Business School graduate, Tristan Francis, who's going to be coming to us from Singapore. He's with Boston Consulting Group. And then we've got GlobalMindED's young professional leaders who many of them graduated from our first gen leadership program. They're all under 30. They'll be sharing their secrets of success for students. And Dr. Nita Mosby-Tyler from the Equity Project will do a talk called Crisis Produces Inner Strength for Lifelong Success. Rocio Perez will be doing Unstoppable the following day. And we'll have a lunch and learn. And then finally, to end the week, we'll have a number of different college presidents, most of them first gen to college. And that will be topped off by a graduation celebration with Aussie Media. We'll be having DJs and different party rooms, and it's going to be very interesting. She's done this before and I haven't, but to see what it's like to party with all the young people that we're celebrating. So thank you so much. And Bena, it was great to work with you all the time on everything we do. Bena's involved in the higher level leadership of GlobalMindED, but just want to say hats off again for all that you do, and thank you for a really tremendous learning hour.
Thank you, and it was great to be there with you.
All right, thanks to everybody. We'll be posting this on YouTube within the next 24 hours so you can share it with folks who did not have a chance to come today. Thanks so much. And Lisa Wyckoff, thank you for all your help. And she just ended the recording, and we'll top it off there. Take care. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.